day to you, Guyana, and welcome to another edition of Facing the Nation. I am Malika N.Ramsey. As always, thank you very much for joining us. It's great to be back with you for another informative week. I am smiling, but there are some very serious things happening in our society. And this is the first Facing the Nation that we're having since last Sunday, that fiery destruction of the Georgetown prisons, of course otherwise known as Lot 12 Camp Street. And some are very, unpleasant, distasteful things are happening in society. People are very frustrated, and they have a right to be. Some people are still in paranoid and panic mode. And, only earlier I was talking to a colleague, and she basically said that she felt as though she's just there waiting for something to happen, but we're hoping that is not the case. And we're trusting that the authorities, the security authorities, are doing everything within their power and everything that they possibly can to rearrest, I should say, those escapees who escaped on Sunday after that fire started. Unfortunately, the Georgetown prisons is basically no more. Most of you have seen the photos. It's burnt completely. It was completely gutted, burnt down, so there is nothing much left there. But we wait to hear and see how, we will move forward from this. There were sentiments already made in the public, both by His Excellency, the President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, Brigadier David Granger, the Public Security Minister, Mr. Kemraj Ramjitan, have been, he's had more than one press conferences since then, and then also the Prime Minister also made some statements. But I want to look at it from a different angle today. Again, as I said, we could not possibly have a program the Friday immediately after that and not focus on that. It's allegedly reported thus far that a few of the escapees might have gone into Buxton. Now, and when people hear that, people get tense and people get uncomfortable, because I may not know all of it, but we have an idea of the history of Buxton when it comes to violence, and even people, security forces, and I'm not talking necessarily under this administration, but we've known what happened in the past in terms of people actually violating the community. The community was targeted. It became a vulnerable, some people call it a ghetto community. I like to refer to it as, unfortunate, because they have been hit with some unfortunate happenings. And one of the persons who have done a lot of work, not only in Buxton, but across our country in general, in terms of helping to keep people calm. He is a political activist. He's a professor. He's an executive member of the Working People's Alliance, and he's been making a lot of sentiments and statements lately. Some of them have, ruffled some feathers, but I know he doesn't mind that because his shoulders are broad, so he can take it. It is my pleasure to welcome back to Facing the Nation Dr. David Hinds. Some of you know him as Professor David Hinds. Welcome back to Facing the Nation, sir.
Thank you very much, Malika, for having me again. It's always a pleasure when I come on this program, because it's one of those programs on which you're faced to, it's facing the nation.
It's facing the nation.
So you're challenged to be as objective as you can.
As you possibly can. Yes, indeed. And I can tell you, Dr. Hinds gives us nothing but that. I am happy that he speaks frankly, but in a tone in which we can understand, and he's not afraid to tell you his views on what's happening and so on. Well, this is the only conversation that we will have on today's program, because it is a very serious one. We're not going to put a timing on Dr. Hinds. We're going to go as far as the conversation can take us and get as much information as we possibly can get out of him on sentiments, possible solutions, and so on, and the work that he continues to do to, in a sense, promote and, protect us as a people. Dr. Hinds, it is unfortunate. The fire of itself is unfortunate. Before we even talk about Buxton, I'd like to get your sentiments on Sunday's events, the destruction, even, and I know you're very brave about your sentiments, even how the security forces and, by extension, the government has handled it thus far. Let's hear you, sir.
Well, when something like that happens, it's not just the present. Mm-hmm. It's there are a lot of forces that are at work when you have a prison break of that magnitude. Mm-hmm. And the first thing I would want to say is that we should not treat it as a political matter. Okay. Because it is not, and when I say political, I mean partisan. It is not a partisan matter. It's not about whether this government is incompetent or that government is incompetent. It's about a national emergency problem, a national security problem that also has links to the social situation in the country. Now we have to admit it. You know, we are a poor society. And poor societies like ours come with their inherent problems.
Okay.
Unemployment is very high. Our institutions are not strong enough. Corruption has become endemic in the society. And so when you see a prison break of that magnitude, you're seeing all of those things coming together. And what you see, the prison break really is the consequences of our inability over the years to deal with the problem of reforming the justice system, reforming the penal system, kind of arresting the drift among young people. And there are all kinds of reasons why we have not done as good a job as we wanted to do. But so I would like us to think about the prison break in those terms, in its holistic sense, rather than being micro and trying to point finger. I see some of the statements in the newspapers. I see some statements from people from the PPP and so on, trying to cast blame on the government and so on. Now, as the government of the day, the government has to take responsibility, not necessarily blame. You see? And I want to make a distinction between that, between responsibility and blame. So I would like to alert our nation to see this as symptomatic of things in our society that needs repairing, that need repairing.
I am happy you said that in terms of responsibility versus blame, and really and truly it's a good way to put it. I did not even think about that. Now, what we're seeing now and hearing is blame.
Yes.
Some of us, even supporters of this government and people who are, you know, even though I'm a junior part of the government, some of us even lashed out at our own, saying, because, and I'm happy that you said that this is a security issue, it is not partisan, because God forbid an escapee should come up to you. For example, the young man they allegedly kidnapped and took him all the way to the Baghdad because they wanted his car. I am sure they didn't go up to him and ask him, who you vote for? You vote for PPP or you voted for APNU? If it's PPP, you can collect. If it's APNU, you can collect you. So I am happy that you did make it clear that this is not partisan. None of us are immune from anything that could possibly happen if a security system breaks down. However, we have blame being casted left, right, and center. You have people are actually, and this is even the opposition leader side, but there are people, some of our own, and when I say own here, I mean people who are a part of the current administration and major supporters of the current administration. They are calling for Minister Ramsey to either be fired or to resign, and this call is coming against the backdrop that we had a fiery prison situation, even though it wasn't as bad as this time around. I should not even say that, because we had about 16 or 17 prisoners who died last year. But their call comes against the backdrop that we had that situation last year, and now we have a situation where the prison was completely destroyed. How do you say to those people, look, you can't blame the current administration, and you can't blame the public security minister? How do you respond to those sort of accusations?
Well, you kind of reason it with them, because you've got to understand where they're coming from.
Okay.
It's some of our own supporters, and when I say our, no, I'm speaking as someone who belongs to a party that's part of the government, hence I'm part of the government. Some of our supporters are understandably frustrated. Because remember, our government came into power with tremendously high expectations. After people would have gone through that long period of the criminalization of the state, the breakdown of institutions, people then went out and they voted. It was an election of emotions and passion and hope. And so people came out of that with very big expectations of government. Now, those of us who study government know that a government cannot turn around a situation like that in 2 years. Where I think we may have erred is that having come to power, we did not go to people and talk to them about their expectations.
Okay.
Talk to them and say, look, we know that you expect us to create miracles. However, government is not about miracles. Here is the, and keep that line of communication open with our people. I think we have fell down there. And so when we hear our supporters now, in a sense, being exasperated in this situation, I think is as a result of us not keeping that line of communication open. But we should use this opportunity to, in a sense, reset our conversation with our supporters in Guyana at large, and to say, look, these are problems that societies like ours, there's structural problems. You see, there's structural problems. When you are in a situation where your prison wardens, your policemen and women are not satisfied with the wages that they get, they're not satisfied with the conditions under which they work, it means then that they don't have the same kind of commitment
and passion.
But these are people who are responsible for our security, who are responsible for our safety. And I think one of the big lessons I would like to take from this is to say that we've got to make commitment among the people who secure us. We've got to make that a priority. That is, you hear stories of, who knew about the plan, who may have known about the plan for the guys to escape. And whether there was collusion between wardens and the guys and so on and so forth. Now, when you hear those things, it seems to me the challenge then is for us to begin to construct a security force in our police, in our prison service, in our fire service, in our army, a security force that is committed to the safety, first and foremost, of our people. And to remove that temptation that is among our security forces to compromise themselves. And so forth. I think that's a structural problem. It's a social problem that I would advise strongly that our government take an interest in. It may call for some retraining and resensitizing of that force. It may call for giving them incentives not to engage in that kind of compromising activity. It may call for some tough talk. It may call for some weeding out of the obviously open compromised people. But you've got to articulate what I call a vision. What do you want your prison warden, your prison service to look like in 3 years? Because we have 3 years in this government. And you set yourself that goal. It's about where you recruit the prison service members from. You're recruiting them from our own communities. Maybe we have to begin to go in the communities and begin to cultivate a kind of citizen, so that when the police force comes and the prison service comes to recruit those people, they're recruiting people who are committed and who are not prepared to easily compromise. So I think we've got to begin to talk about an holistic vision, because that is what this tells us. People are talking about the immediate thing, about people breaking out and so forth. As I said, that's the consequence.
Right.
I would like us to think about the line and the social issues that lead to that.
Okay, I am happy you talked about possibly going into communities and training people, so that when the force, maybe in the army, comes to recruit, that you'll have them. I'm going to, because I would want to know if you think that it's necessary to have a formal program for that, but we're going to get to that in a minute. Before I even talk about Buxton, however, did the government either erred or took too long to implement some of the recommendations that were made in that COI that followed last year's prison fire?
The short answer is yes, but let me give the long answer.
Okay.
Governments like ours are usually forced with making very tough choices.
Okay.
What are your priorities? Where do you spend money? Do you spend money on building out the sugar industry? Do you spend money on education? Do you spend money on national security and so forth? There's always a challenge, because there's not a lot of money to go around. And so I'm in sympathy with the government for not prioritizing the results of the Commission of Inquiry in terms of implementing them. And so that's the long answer. But the short answer is that I think given the fact, and I go back to the expectations, I think our government may have erred in not saying, look, here are my 3 priorities in the next 5 years. Right? Here are my 3 priorities. I'm going to reorganize. We are going to reorganize sugar. We are going to begin to put ourselves in place for oil. We are going to deal with the question of our young people. And if you're talking about dealing with young people, you have to talk about crime and criminalization of our young people. And here is the next thing that we're going to deal with. We're going to make national security and national safety, because national security sometimes is seen as securing the top. But when we talk about security, we're talking about the securitization of ordinary people. And so if you say that securing the nation is a priority, then you look at your budget and you say, we've got to balance what we give to sugar and what we give to the security of our people. And I think we may have erred in not understanding how the question of the security of our people has tentacles in other areas of the society. Understood. It has tentacles in terms of young people. It has tentacles to social cohesion. It has tentacles to business. Because when you have a situation like this, the business community gets very antsy. People,
you see the private sector commission suddenly speaking,
and so on and so forth. So this thing has implications and repercussions for other areas. So if you say, I'm going to deal with the economy and I'm not dealing with security, you're erring, because when the security goes bad, businesses are affected. If you say, I'm going to deal with education, but I'm not dealing with national security and so on, when national security goes bad, children don't want to go to school, children don't want to come out in the streets, that kind of thing. So I think we may have erred. In fact, I would say, I think we erred in not making priority. And I would urge my government that we've got to go back to the old-fashioned vision and saying, here is where, in the short term, in the next 3 years, we have 3 years, here is where we want to take this society. And if we say that, then what are our priorities to get us there? We can't do everything. We can't do everything. We're a small government. We are
limited
resources. We can't, but there are certain things that are ordinary people do not remember a government for small things that are done behind the scenes. They remember a government for big things that are done that affect their lives in tangible ways. And that's one of the first lessons of politics that we have to remember, and we've got to go back to the drawing board, I think.
Okay, great. Viewers, if you're now tuning in, this is Facing the Nation. Of course, today I am chatting with Dr. David Hinds. We are talking about a number of things. Our conversation comes in light of the fact that the Lot 12 prisons would have been destroyed last Sunday as inmates tried to escape, and some of them successfully did also too. We'll also talk about Buxton, and then coming up a little later on in the program, he is also, Dr. Hinds has also been making headlines for what I call, and I think I saw this quoted somewhere too, what seemed to be a war of words between the Working People's Alliance, of course he's an executive member of the WPA, and the government. And while that is happening, people seem to forget that WPA is a part of a Partnership for National Unity, which is a part of the coalition government. So he'll talk about that, and he'll talk about some of the sentiments that he made and what some of us see as harsh criticisms. But for now, Dr. Hinds, let's talk about Buxton. Why do prison escapees, at least from what happened Sunday, feel so safe and feel that it is okay to make Buxton a quote-unquote safe haven for them to run after escaping from prison? And is that a worrying sign?
Yes, it's a very important question, Malika, and it's personal, it's political, but it's also personal for me. I'm a Buxtonian. I'm very jealous of my Buxton roots. I mean, what I have become started in Buxton and was molded in Buxton. And I have serious respect for that community and what that community represented and still represents. And certainly the prison break in 2002 and the hiding out of the guys there and what spawned from that is really creating in the public mind a kind of image of Buxton that is really runs counter to everything that Buxton has represented and continues to represent. And so as Buxtonians, we struggle with that. Look, let me say first and foremost that I think after the jailbreak of 2002, the masterminds of that jailbreak took advantage of the militancy of Buxton. Buxton, like some other communities, has had this this image and this
like so aggressive.
Yes, we've had this history of militancy, people who stand up, and people who are anti-establishment. You know, Buxtonians would say, but we support you, but you're wrong, and so on. And I think persons took advantage of that militancy and used Buxton as their jumping off spot for whatever project they had. And as a result of that, Buxton and the escapees and whatever happened become intertwined, right? So it doesn't matter that the vast majority of Buxtonians were openly hostile to the use of the village for that kind of thing. And that there obviously was a minority of Buxtonians who may have lent solidarity to the escapees. But the thing is that Buxton has gained that image. It makes sense, therefore, that if 15 years later you have another jailbreak, that this new generation of young men would feel that if there is a safe haven, Buxton is likely to be that safe haven. So, insofar, I've heard the police said that they have intelligence that the men are there. I do not know whether that is true or not. But if it's true, then it's obvious that these guys have a sense of history and recent history, because it's just 15 years ago that the jailbreak happened, and so therefore they would be drawn to go into that village, and it would be unfortunate if that happens, largely because we in the village have spent a lot of energy trying to rebuild the village, because that village had to be rebuilt. Because you're talking about, it was a war zone, and you're talking about a post-traumatic syndrome. You were seeing that among our children, our young people, because they were living in a situation where, you know, there are gunshots every day, you'd have to be hiding. And so therefore, we had to spend time to bring back that village to normalcy. And 15 years later, we felt that we had gone a long way. We have gone a long way in terms of bringing back normalcy to the village. People are free again to walk around. People are free to come into the village. And we have become a normal village, paying attention to education of our young people, paying attention to sensitizing our young people to their civic needs and so forth. And if these young men are there, and it means that there is going to be the constant clash between them and the security forces, Buxton would become again a kind of staging ground for that kind of thing.
And that indeed would be really sad. Apart from the fear that it could drive into the citizens of Buxton, every year we have a new crop of young men graduating from high school, a new crop of little ones going into nursery school and so on. Are you concerned that instead of driving fear into them, this in a sense could harden them and say, well, look, our parents our grandparents tried to make Buxton, you know, a wholesome community. It doesn't make sense. Are you afraid that this sort of thing can influence them and, you know, harden them and in a sense contribute to making them criminals?
It's a great risk that could happen. When we study these situations across the world, and we study our own experiences here in 2002, that is a distinct probability, it's more than a possibility. Because, and I'm glad you raised that, because I want to speak to this issue of our young people. I think after successive governments 50 years of independence. I think we are at this juncture where young people don't seem to feel ownership of their communities and their country. They seem to feel that they're left outside. You know, they're young people, and when their parents have to beg for a raise in salary, when, you know, they go home and there's not enough to eat. As children, it has an impact on you. You know, in the 70s, as a young man, I experienced that. I came from a poor community. But because we were living in different circumstances, there was still hope. And so young people like myself turn that feeling of alienation into activism, into studying harder and so forth. It's asking too much of our young people in these circumstances to emulate that, because the circumstances have changed. And I think this is a question of humanity. And I want to stress that to our viewers here today, because often we don't think about the humanity of people. Here in the Caribbean, as products of bondsmen, people who were enslaved and indentured, our humanity has always been at the center of what we strive to be in the world. Because if you were enslaved, your humanity was taken away. And so the struggle is to, how do you regain your humanity? And so I think our young people, the sense of alienation comes from the fact that people don't seem to believe that we care about them in a human way. You know, when we want a big party, we advertise it to them. You know, and even we as political people, when we want votes, we go
to the
and we
young
hear the big
people,
band and so on and things.
I'm happy that you brought that up. Yes.
Yes, and so therefore, over a period of time, they come to believe that that's all their work. And that's not being human, you see. And so therefore, I think we have to think about the humanity of those young people. The young man who had a good education, but got into that unfortunate situation at the bank. We talk about his education, but we don't talk about the fact that although he's educated, he's part of this larger community of alienation. You see, education today doesn't play the same kind of role that it played before, because there are other distractions.
And now it's like a show, because I am happy that you bring this up, because there are people who are capable in so many institutions, not only in Guyana but across the world, and they are brilliant, and you see their brilliance every day, but you say to them, look, if you don't have this on paper, you don't have a certain degree or what, we're not going to give this to you. So in a sense, it's unfortunate, but in some cases it has become, for lights, camera, and action, it's a show. You could go and say, oh, well, I have a degree in this, or I have a degree in that, but what can you do with it?
And Malika, there's another important point I would like to bring up here, and following up on what you just said there, and that is education. For what?
Yes.
It's easy to have our young people pass exams and do well, but if we don't supplement that education with a sense of responsibility and a sense of ownership of our communities and our country, a sense that Guyana is this place, despite the difficulties, there is hope for us. You see, so it's education without hope, education without a sense of belonging, education within the context of alienation ultimately does not liberate our young people. So again, it's a challenge for our government, but it's a challenge for the society, because this is not just about government. The society, I think as a society, we've dropped the ball in terms of our own role, you see, in terms of socializing our young people and preparing new generations to take their responsibility. After all, this country is all we have.
Exactly.
It's all we have. And so sometimes we get off in our political quarrels and all that stuff, and forget that there are human beings in this country who are crying out. And I think the lesson from that young man, because I think he's not singular. He may be the one that may have gone for this and so on.
And then, and that's the thing, that is what we know about.
Yes.
You know, you don't know all criminals.
You don't. And I think the lesson there is for us to stop for a minute and rethink our relationship to our fellow human beings in this country, and to think about their humanity, because at the end of the day, that is what is important.
Okay. I know as somebody who is not only a Buxtonian, but you're also concerned. I know you would have visited Buxton recently, in recent days since this has happened. What is the mood like? I mean, you did talk about the fact that they can slip back into something no one in Guyana wants Buxton to go back to, but what is the mood like of the people, the atmosphere and so on?
It's a kind of graft of fear and uncertainty.
Okay.
Apprehension. You see it in the faces of people as they walk. Nobody says very much. And insofar as they say anything, people are talking about us praying that, this thing doesn't get out of hand, and, our village is not a staging ground for whatever clashes there will be, and so on. But there's a deep sense of apprehension among people. Because I can tell you frankly, I don't think that community, I don't think this country can take another round of that dislocation. That thing dislocated and changed Guyana forever. We've not recovered. We've not recovered from that yet, because the tentacles of that kind of instability that comes out of that thing really runs far. And you're quite right. There are young people in communities who are so alienated, and when that kind of thing gets out of hand, they see that as something that they can become part of, because the rest of us have not put our arms around them and to say we love you, and they look for love in other places and so forth. We're working against time as a society, and I think that this is an eye-opener for all of us. And I would like the PPP, which is making songs on the outside, to say, but you are part of this problem too. Because you, for 2.5 decades, were in power. And there is a way in which your own policies have contributed towards the criminalization of young black men, criminalization of young men in general, because they're Indian young men and Amerindian young men who have been criminalized. But the black community
it's always dominant, and that's why I tell people, let's not try to pretend here. It is dominant with black people, and not because you are pro-black means you're anti any other race. It is a fact. It is a fact.
And so they have to bear responsibility also, because their policies, I think, have contributed tremendously to the sense of alienation among our young people. And I would like to see Mr. Jack and the PPP to stop using this as politics, and to join with the government forces and to say that this is a critical point in our history. It's not just about the men who have escaped and what they can do, because we can catch those men tomorrow and so on. But I think the problem remains there.
Yes.
And so therefore we've got to see it in that regard. One would hope that good sense prevails among the young men who have escaped. The easy thing would be for them to turn themselves in and to stop the thing. But as we know, the dynamics may not lend to that. And so our security forces have to be very, very, very careful about how they deal with that situation. Because we have the whole issue here of human rights.
Exactly.
That has to be taken into consideration.
Okay. All right. We have to move on very soon to politics and ministerial matters. But I want to stay on crime a little bit more and ask you one final question. Now, because of this fire, the prisoners' reports, from all the reports that we're reading and the press conferences we're looking at and so on, those prisoners that, and thank God none of them so far, there are no reports of any of them dying in that fire, but they've had to be transferred to Lusignan prison. And, we're seeing some very unhealthy things coming out of Lusignan prison because of that. Some for petty crimes, for want of a better term, petty crimes had to be freed. Now, do you see that are you concerned that could be a burden on sections of the population and people actually using this situation to commit crimes, even those people who are not first-time offenders, the ones who are being released now in order to create space?
That is a possibility, but I think we can contain that.
Okay.
I think, and let me say here, at our last executive meeting, the Working People's Alliance discussed this at our executive level, and we are of the view, first thing is that we have to commend the vast majority of prisoners who did not escape, and those who escaped and turned themselves in. We've got to reach out to them and to say, you've done the right thing. Would you imagine if 300, 400 of those prisoners, I think what the society would be? So we've got to recognize that there is in spite of the circumstances, there is a sense of responsibility that those young people faced, showed in the circumstances by not running away, and those who ran away, some of them came back. Here is what we need to do, is that we need to work on that segment of the population. I think those young people should be put in programs, all right, rehabilitation programs, and try to turn them away. A lot of it is petty crimes, you know, smoking marijuana, a little piece of joint, and so on, you know, but it's an infraction of the law.
Of the law.
All right? And so while we do not subscribe to the notion that, you know, those crimes should have heavy sentences and put young people away, we feel that we need to rehabilitate those young people, because there's a light. There's a light of hope. There's a ray of hope there. When young men, mostly in a major prison break, could decide, I'm not running away, you know, and if instinctively I do that, I come back and I turn myself in. That's first. Second, I think the challenges facing the security forces in the circumstances, they did a damn good job.
Okay.
Yeah, and we want to say that, because yes, there are rotten eggs among the forces, but I think when crisis like the one that happened there on Sunday hit, we see that humanity in our people come out. And I think the security forces in the circumstances really did a wonderful job. You know, they weren't exchange of fire, not too many people were slaughtered, and people were not slaughtered, and so on and so forth. And they managed to bring the situation under some semblance of calm, bring it under control. So I think we have to commend them, because we've got to encourage these men and women who are in harm's way. Because when you're a prison warder, you're constantly in harm's way. And I think insofar as they were able to bring the situation under control, they did an excellent job, and we have to commend them. I see all kinds of things. People are judging the force based on what is bad about it, and forgetting the things that are commendable about it. And we also I also want to take this opportunity on behalf of all of us, all right, to say to the family of the young man who was killed, I think he's from Hinds Grove, and to say to that family that your son made the supreme he made that sacrifice, the supreme sacrifice, with his life, and so therefore we mourn with them, we suffer their loss. And we also urge our government, which has already taken strides, to ensure that the family, because apparently he was the breadwinner in the family, is well taken care of. But also to say to other young men who may have been thinking about going into the prison service and other services, that not to be daunted by that, to use this sacrifice by that young man to redouble their commitment to their country. So we wanted to say that. Now, Malika, our young people are our future. You are young, and you know it more than I would ever know it, what it is to be young. And I would urge our country, or urge our government, to invest in our young people. Because if you invest in your young people, you're investing in the present and the future of your country. Okay? And, you know, we must begin to pass legislation to deter young people from getting into petty crimes. All right? You know, a young man smoke a spliff, you hold him and you put him in jail, he goes in there and he comes out a hardback criminal. You know? And that is not, in the long run, good for us. So here is an opportunity for us to say, what can we learn from this? And one of the things we can learn is that we should invest in our young people.
Okay, great. Perfect. Viewers, if you're now tuning in, you missed a very really good part of this conversation. Those of you who missed it, I always urge you can check my YouTube channel and Facebook pages later on in the day for the entire conversation. Now on to the second half of our conversation. As you know, it made the news maybe a month ago or so, if so long, maybe not so long ago. The former, well, I say former because he is former now, former Minister of Education, Dr. Rupert Rupnarine, was reassigned to the public. What is the Public Service Department? The former minister was reassigned from Education to that. Some sentiments were made, and there seem to have been some throwing of words. Of course, Dr. David Hinds has never been shy about putting his opinion and the WPA's opinion out there. Again, let me remind you, he did also remind you, the WPA is a part of a Partnership for National Unity, which is a part of the government, the coalition government. That makes the WPA a part of the government. Things were said and people were not necessarily satisfied and so on. But we have Dr. David Hinds to clear all of that up. Dr. Hinds, as I did say earlier, there seemed to be a war of words going. The WPA seemed not satisfied, or I should say unhappy, that Dr. Rupnarine, WPA member, government minister, was reassigned from one ministry to a certain department, and you feel that he wasn't given a hearing. Clear that up. Let's talk about where all of this is coming from, especially people who feel that there is a war brewing and there is some sort of threat that WPA will leave or WPA is not necessarily pro-government. Let's talk about those things.
Right, and let me preface my answer dealing directly with the last thing you said. WPA is leaving the coalition. I want to say emphatically on this program. And you've heard it here from me, and what I'm saying here represents a sentiment at this moment of the Working People's Alliance. We are not leaving the coalition. It's not on the agenda. It's not going to be contemplated at this moment by us. So I want to be very clear about that. The second thing I want to say is that our public engagement is really an engagement among partners. This engagement, it's called a war of words, and people, it's a fair description, but if it's a war of words, it's a war of words with love.
Okay.
That the WPA engagement publicly has to do with our concern of camaraderie among partners, but more importantly, our concern about where this country is going and what we want to see this government accomplish.
Okay.
The third thing I want to say is that the WPA did not suddenly decide that we were going to go public and begin to speak. For 2 years since our government has come to power, the WPA has tried everything to get the institutions of the Partnership for Unity to work. We've written to those who are in charge, asking for meetings, and those have not been heeded. For 2 years, within those 2 years, a very sensitive matter, the matter of the Walter Rodney issue. The new government came in, it stopped the Walter Rodney Commission, it didn't ask the WPA, it didn't say anything to us. Here is Walter Rodney, our leader, and this commission has to do with him. And the government comes in, the government didn't bring us and say, look, we're thinking that we need to stop this thing. What are your views? Let's talk, you're a partner, and so on. And they did that. We swallowed all of that. We swallowed, but
if I may interject here, Dr. Hinds, respectfully, some people may argue though, but you have a government minister who was a part of this, who is WPA, and that, of course, would have been before he was reassigned, Dr. Rupnarine. What do you say to people who would argue to say, well, you have to, WPA has to be in the know because a senior minister is a part of the government? I'm glad you mentioned that.
Our senior minister is part of the parliament, and he's part of the cabinet, right? And the cabinet is not a place where you make policy. It's not a place where you consult. It's a place where proposals are put. There's consensus. There is a sense of not bucking the animal at there, and so on.
Gotcha.
So the cabinet is not that kind of place. We feel that the place where you try to work those things out and talk those things through and decide on policy and decide on the vision going forward is in the councils outside, in the APNU council, in the AFC council, in the councils. And those councils have not been working. They have not been meeting since we've come to power. And so we held our peace for 2 years because we didn't want people to say that here is the WPA, wanting to break this thing up and so forth. And so after 2 years, after tremendous pressure from our membership, our supporters, and some people in the wider society who felt that we were muted. Now, the other thing is the WPA comes out of a tradition in which it is always questioned power. Different parties have different tradition.
Understood.
And the WPA has never been shy of asking questions of power. We come out of that. Our partners who went into the partnership with us know that about us. So after 2 years, and the incident with Dr. Rupnarayan happened, that incident became the occasion for us to raise questions.
Scale.
Right. So there are two things about the Rupnarayan thing. One is Rupnarayan, it's now known, was removed from the ministry ostensibly for lack of performance, that he didn't perform well and so forth. And after a careful study of what he did at that ministry, what he attempted to do, the things he put in place in 2 years, we came to the conclusion that the authorities may have erred in moving him because he was moving the ministry in the right direction. And we felt that at least you should have given him a term for him to see that through. So that's the first thing. But the more important thing for us is the manner in which it was done. We felt that as a partner, if you're thinking about removing our minister, you would want to sit down with us and say, here is what my thinking is. Let me hear your thinking. Let us together come to an understanding as to how we will treat with this matter. We may have, coming out of that, agreed with the president that Dr. Rupnarayan should have been moved. We may have.
How do you respond to public sentiments that, look, Dr. Rupnarayan knew, but it's not our fault. When I say our, people who would talk about this in general, it's not our fault if he didn't share it with the rest of the WPA.
Well, let's correct that right now. Dr. Rupnarayan didn't know. Dr. Rupnarayan met with the authorities on Sunday. The WPA was called on, and he met with the authorities on Sunday and was told of the decision. The WPA was called on Monday and told of the decision, and the decision was announced on Tuesday. That's the sequence. So for those people who may have felt that this was it was not. The decision was taken. Dr. Rupnarayan was informed of the decision on Sunday. The WPA was informed on Monday, and the decision was announced on Tuesday, the death anniversary of Dr. Walter Rodney. That's the sequence of events. And we feel that that's not the way to operate in a partnership. And we are not saying that our partners did that, or the government did that out of malice. I think probably that's the way they do business. My own view, and it's shared by a lot of us in the WPA, is that, you know, when you are in a partnership and you have big parties and small parties, you take small parties for granted. Right, but go ahead.
Because, and again, Dr. Hinds, this is no offense to you, but the question out there is, because people don't necessarily know what has happened inside of the partnership, and this is just to pause the AFC for a bit. We're talking about even before the coalition, when it was just a partnership. The question, and it would be among PNC supporters too, because the fact is PNC has always been the largest partner in a partnership for national unity. The question would be, and to use the way that our, especially on social media, and I know you're on social media, you would hear things like, but David Hinds making noise. What they bring to the partnership, or have they bring votes? Have they brought supporters? There is one senior minister, of course, who is Dr. Rupnarayan, and so on. People would say those things. How would you defend that, of course, in WPA's honor?
Let me preface, as this is the professor in me. They say Guyana is a small country. It doesn't bring much to the international table. But when Guyana goes to the United Nations, it says that we are a member of the United Nations. We may be small, but we have a voice. And every Guyanese would support that. Sometimes in our, in nearsightedness and our partisan sentiment, we say things.
We get emotional.
But I'm asking of you to think about it. Once you get into a union, right? A man and a woman get married, right? That man may bring a house, and the woman may come from her mother's house, and she goes to live. She becomes an equal partner there. She got to take care of the children, right? She's got to upkeep that house. You tell her that because she didn't bring the house, she don't have an equal stake. People out there, you all listen to me this morning or this afternoon. thing. Let us look at this thing in a sane way. Once you get into a partnership, of course you have to recognize that the PNC, in terms of name recognition, in terms of length of being there, in terms of its ability to mobilize resources, in terms of its ability to mobilize people in the communities to come out and vote, of course it's by far the largest party. Nobody quarrels with that. But that is not the only thing that goes into that political pot. You're a young, budding political activist and politician. There's a lot more to go in there. Our people, our constituency is probably the hardest constituency to get out of the house to go and vote. They're your potential voters. They're PNC voters, right? But you got to get them out of there. And so it means that you have to go there and you have got to reason with them. And the WPA has contributed to that. Other parties contribute to that. You have to have a platform. What are you going to tell people? What are you going to run on? Your manifesto. We have contributed to that. And so therefore, yes, other parties bring things to the table. We're sitting here in a studio that is owned by the leader of one of the parties.
Yes.
And this television station was put to the service, and it was put there, and the coalition was able to use it. Are you going to tell Mr. Sharma that he didn't bring nothing to the table because he didn't bring votes? You see, so I understand where it come from, but we have to change habits. And we've got to say that we are in this thing together. We recognize the strengths of various parties, and look, our quarrel with WPA is not with the PNC. Let me make that very, very, very clear. The PNC and the WPA worked from 2006 to 2011 from the joint opposition political parties, and we were the pioneers in putting this thing together, putting the APNU together. And then once the APNU was put together, the AFC came on board. The AFC would not have joined with the PNC. The AFC joined with the APNU. And we have to understand that. So our quarrel is not with the PNC. We have fraternal relations with the PNC as a party. Our quarrel on this matter is with those who are running the government. Because we feel that they are the ones who are making these decisions. The decision to move Dr. Ryan was not a PNC decision. The decision to inform us without consultation is not a PNC. This is a decision of those who run the government. So our quarrel is not with the PNC. We have fraternal relations with the PNC. PNC members, we all get along well together. We have fraternal relations with the other parties in the coalition. So we want to make that clear. Okay. And when we speak, we are not speaking so that we can destroy. We are speaking so that we can let our supporters out there know that, look, there are issues within, and we are going to work those issues out. Because when we come 2020, we want to go to our public, which is going to say, what have you done in 5 years? We want to say, well, for the first 2 years, we may have been slow off the mark. And we may have had some problems, but we were able to correct those problems, and we were able to advance our mandate. And we come to you and ask you in all unity that because it's unity that gets us in power. You know, the AFC may not have brought votes, but once the AFC came on that ticket, our supporters were able to say, we could win this thing.
Yeah, because there are more of us.
Yes. We can win this thing. So we want to go into 2020 with unity. And so we want our population to recognize that when we raise questions, we're raising questions because we want that solidarity to be there, that unity to be there, so that we can try in 2020 to regain the government again.
All right, great. Well said. And I'm happy that you cleared that up, even though you know this, because this is your environment. Some of the people out there will not necessarily agree with you. But coming back to the Dr. Ryan matter, I know you've been saying it a lot, that there is, I think there's a council meeting coming up, and you're expecting, things to turn around and change in terms of more collaboration and so on. Of course, just for the purpose of the viewership of this particular program, let's talk about what you're expecting come the meeting, and have persons in government reached out to you, and do you feel as though there is a solution, to what I would call at this point a problem in communication among partnerships and parties and so on? Do you see, a solution on the horizon?
Well, yes, we have to be optimistic. We've worked together to put the meeting together. There have been consultation.
Okay.
The General Secretary has been in contact with our point person that we have appointed. We have appointed 2 of our members to relate to the General Secretary of the APNU, and there have been constant communication between them.
Okay.
We would not like to, at this point, to preempt what is going to happen at the meeting. But just to say that we go into the meeting optimistic,
Okay.
that this thing is going to happen. And we've already said that one of the beef that we have is the question of consultation. So no doubt that would feature very prominently on the agenda. But other than that, we would like to say we go into the meeting with an open mind. We do not go into the meeting with some presupposed agenda,
animosity
and all of that. We recognize that we are at a juncture where things have come to a head, things have not been going well, and we would not like to impose and to say, here are the preconditions that we have going into this meeting. We have no preconditions. We have concerns that we have expressed in the public. There are some that we have not expressed in the public. And we go to the meeting with an open mind that the meeting will be the beginning of a process. Because we don't see that meeting as solving all the problems that we have. But it is the beginning of a process. Because, you know, the process of this repair takes time. And the process of repair sometimes takes longer. To think, but we are optimistic because we, like we said, we have very good relations with the PNC and other partners in the APNU, and we're optimistic that we'll be able to bring these matters to the fore and to have some resolution. Of course, it's political parties with different views, and we are going to have concourse of ideas.
What is it they say when people get married and people speak at weddings? What's it? Teeth and tongue
must bite. And I think our population must understand that, right? I think there is the anxiety. Because a lot of people have invested their future in this government.
Yes.
And so understandably when they see this thing that one partner is making some noise, they get worried. And we understand that. But we want to say that what we're doing with love, and the objective is not to break up anything. We have been a party that has championed coalition. From the time, the WPA is a coalition of ASCRA, IPRA, Ratoon, and the Working People's Vanguard Party.
Well, you see, I'm being schooled today because I didn't know that.
Yes, we're a party of coalition. And so therefore we have always seen coalition politics as the way to go. And so we would like to think that we've spent 4 or 5 decades in trying to build what we have now. And it would be stupid of us to break down what we have built. But having said that, we want the building to be sound and to be on sound footing. And we want to be treated with dignity and respect. Dignity and respect. You know?
All right. Unfortunately, I didn't realize we were able to go this stretch. But this is what happens when you have Dr. David Hinds with all of this energy coming and talking to us and really, give us a different view and, open our minds, especially some of us when, and most of the viewers know and understand me by now. I can get very emotional at times. So it's good Dr. Hinds has come to bring a different perspective. However, before I wrap up today's program, Dr. Hinds, I'd like to take the conversation back to where we began. And, just to get some words of inspiration and so on from you for the public at this time. Because even though we're going about our daily lives and, doing what we have to do as a people, there is still that fear.
Yeah.
And I think there will be that fear and people will be apprehensive until all of the prisoner escapees would have been recaptured. What would you like to say to the public at this time? What would you like to leave with them at this time?
I would like to leave with them, we are approaching the period of emancipation. 100 and almost 139 years after emancipation. And I want to say that in the spirit of emancipation, we were emancipating ourselves from enslavement. And enslavement was about the brutality of the human being and the taking away of the human spirit. But emancipation was also about overcoming. That after 400 years of that brutal institution, that our people withstood it and we survived and we overcame it. And so as we are faced with yet again another challenge to our own personal and larger national security. another challenge to the equilibrium of our society, a challenge to our ability to exist as free people who can take charge of our own situation. As we ponder that, let us think about overcoming. Let us think that if there is a people, it's the people who are the children of enslavement and indentureship. We can write the manual on overcoming. And so let us draw on that historical manual and to say, this too shall pass, but it would not pass until we actively, both in our communities, both at the level of our representatives in government, come together and to say, as our national poet reminded us in that very short but profound poem, this I've learned, today a speck, tomorrow hero. Hero or monster, you're consumed. Like a jig shakes the loom, like a web is spun the pattern. All are involved, all are consumed. The word of Martin Carter, our national poem. All of us are involved, all of us are consumed. And at this moment, we've got to pick up the pieces and say, repair, repair, regenerate, and overcome.
Perfectly said, and viewers, I can't add anything else to that. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you very much, Dr. David Hinds, for coming and sharing with us on Facing the Nation, of course, bringing a different perspective, as you always do. And of course, you know, viewers, by now you know he's no stranger. He's become like Facing the Nation family. So the minute I call him, he says yes immediately. So we know that he will be back depending on what topic Facing the Nation is dealing with. Unfortunately, on that note, I have to say bye for now, because of course we're out of time. Those of you who are probably now tuning in, really sorry you missed a good one as usual. Of course, this will be loaded to YouTube a little later on in the day, and it will also be posted to my Facebook page. That's for those of you who follow me and on social media, and I'm sure Dr. David Hinds will subsequently share it also. So because I really would want people to hear his sentiments on everything today, especially on Buxton, on the fiery prison break, on the security sector, and of course he spoke about the WPA's relationship with the government, because the WPA is a part of the government. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. I am Malika Ramsey. Thank you so very much for tuning in. Of course, I always urge you, be good Guyanese citizens, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and today I'm going to add, be extremely vigilant. Until next week, goodbye.